Hi, everyone. Um, Thanks for bearing through the crowds and coming here. Hopefully, we're in for a fun and informative session. My name is Ajay Agarwal. I'm a partner with Bain Capital Ventures. We're an early stage venture fund. And the topic today, hopefully, I assume, a topic that's near and dear to everyone's heart here in this room, which is how do you create a category? I assume all of you are working on game changing, innovative technology companies. You're trying to convince the customer that this isn't something that you've got to convince them to buy, but that they have to buy, that this is a category that's got to be part of their stack. And so, how do you go about doing that? And so, over the next 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to walk through a few case studies and a few lessons learned on how you create a category, and hopefully some tactical lessons that each of you can take away. So, with that, let's get started. We'll hopefully have some time at the end for questions. Um, 1 second on Bain Capital Ventures. We're a national firm. We've got offices across the country. We invest heavily in SaaS. We're a multi-stage firm, so early stage, seed and Series A, all the way through growth stage. So keep us in mind for any opportunities where you need a funding partner. So, what are the key lessons around creating a category? How do you go about doing it, and what can we learn from some of the predecessors before us? Really, three things I want to talk about today. First is elevate your message. Second is get others to evangelize. And third, build out the ecosystem and get the ecosystem behind the category. Let me start with elevate. How many of you know what the category was called back in the 90s before it became CRM, Customer Relationship Management? Does anyone know what it was called before? It's called SFA. It was also called Opportunity Management System. And if you go back to 1993, there was a trade show where people would sell sales software. The most popular piece of software was on a floppy disk. It was called Act software. You would buy it as an individual rep, and you'd use it to manage your contacts. Tom Siebel came around and said, we can do this better. We're going to create a category around this technology. And people call it Salesforce automation. They call it opportunity management system because it's a system to manage your opportunities. And we're going to rebrand this entire space, and we're going to call it customer relationship management. Now, the crazy thing about CRM is it really doesn't manage your customers. It manages your opportunities and your Salesforce. And so, in a lot of ways, Salesforce automation and opportunity management are more appropriate and more accurate descriptions of what Siebel and Orem and Vantiv and all the companies in that era did. But let me ask you a question. How many CEOs of companies care about opportunity management systems? The answer is zero. How many CEOs care about customer relationship management? The answer is 100%. And this is the genius of Siebel Systems back in the day, and resulted in every one of those companies having market caps over $1 billion. The category obviously being massive, and then the cloud successor to Siebel being Salesforce.com. And so you'll see this pattern repeated over and over again, where the actual functional or tactical value of your software, can be described, by your users in a certain way. And the question is, how do you elevate it? So if you look at, a few of the examples, we talked about Siebel going from opportunity management to customer relationship management. Same thing happened with Ariba. Ariba got started in the mid 90s, and the focus of Ariba was on e-procurement. How do we help a procurement officer in a back office of a company more cheaply acquire goods from their suppliers? How to use the internet, auctions, to transform this process. Now, again, most CEOs don't think of procurement as a strategic function. It's important. It's a back office. It's a cost center. And the genius of Keith Krach, the founder and CEO of Ariba, was he elevated the category. If you remember, in the mid '90s is the birth of e-commerce. People were talking about Dell.com, Amazon.com, and those companies. Dell was the highest fastest growing company on Nasdaq in the '90s. And Keith said, "This is it. It's B2B e-commerce. Every company that's in B2B wants to be at the forefront of B2B e-commerce. Ariba is a system that connects you and your suppliers, thereby enabling B2B e-commerce." And so again, just like the Siebel example, take something tactical and functional and elevate it. Same thing more recently with one of our portfolio companies, Gainsight. When you think about the birth of that space and a set of startups that got started 4 or 5 years ago, it was all focused on SaaS, churn reduction, retention. Again, very descriptive of what the early versions of that software did. And Gainsight and others, including Salesforce, have elevated this category to call it customer success. And again, just like in the Siebel example, how many CEOs care about customer success? 100% care about customer success. And then lastly, EchoSign, DocuSign category, companies that are focused on e-signatures, changing this to really being about converting all of your transactions to digital. Take something tactical and move it up. So this is, I think, an important exercise for every one of your companies to go through. We go through it with our companies to think about what is that ultimate prize that you want to win. And you may not have the credibility today to necessarily win that prize or convince your customers that it's CRM instead of Salesforce automation. But I think you want to have that goal in mind, because I think it drives your early marketing efforts. I think it drives your product efforts. It drives the language that you want your Salesforce and your customer success teams to speak when they're with their customers. And you want to get the ball rolling. And you have to be a little careful here, because if you go too aggressive on the elevate message, people will say, I don't know what that means. If Siebel had come out day one and said, we're CRM, most customers would say, I don't know what that is. I don't know what a CRM system is. So you have to lay the foundation, but you need to understand the path you're going down. So this is, I think, of the 3 messages, the single most important one to get right. The second piece is getting others to evangelize for you. So once Siebel had made this decision in the 90s to go from Salesforce automation or opportunity management up to CRM, they ran a year-long series of ads in the Wall Street Journal. This is back in the days when people actually read the print version of the Wall Street Journal. And you'd open it up, and there'd be a full-page ad with Charles Schwab saying, Charles Schwab cares about its customers, therefore we use Siebel. Now again, the crazy thing is Charles Schwab interacts with people like all of us. Siebel or Salesforce is not the system they use to manage that. Yet Siebel is able to convince Charles Schwab that to stand up and expound on this message. Now, this goes back to the earlier point, which is this is a message Charles Schwab cared about and wanted to be associated with. We are a customer-oriented organization. And just like Charles Schwab, Tom Siebel got John Chambers at Cisco. He got the CEO, Ken Chenault, at American Express. CEO after CEO after CEO saying, we care about our customers. So all of a sudden, if I'm an executive and I pick up the paper and I see this ad, I say to myself, well, we care about customers. I care about my relationship with my customers. I better call Siebel. I need a CRM. I'm going to call my CIO. We need a CRM. And that's how all of a sudden the market pull starts happening, where this goes from something that you as the vendor are evangelizing out now the companies are pulling in because they've decided this is a strategic priority. Same thing is happening in the customer success space, with Gainsight, where same story. Every company wants to be associated with customer success and caring about customer success. Keith Kroc was over at our offices recently, and he was telling some stories of the early days of Ariba, and he was on a panel at Davos, and sitting next to him was the CEO of FedEx, Fred Smith. And the moderator said to Keith, tell us about B2B e-commerce and Ariba. And he went and gave the elevator pitch. And then they turned to Fred Smith, and Fred Smith said, we've shaved off 6% of our costs of all of our materials thanks to Ariba, thanks to B2B e-commerce. And so this idea that your customers are the biggest evangelists around the message and around the positioning, this is critical. Third is you've got to build the ecosystem. You've got to get the ecosystem aboard. If you're the only one expounding this message, you'll be the only one in the category, and it won't be a category. You've got to get your competitors aboard. It's got to be a category that is not so specific to you that no one else can be in it. It's got to be a category where it's pretty clear to the analyst that there are a whole set of companies that are part of it. You've got to convince the partners, whether they're service providers, implementation partners, that they want to be part of it. And clearly, as I mentioned before, the customers. But it's got to feel like a movement. It's got to feel like something bigger and larger than your individual company, but inextricably linked to your company. For any of you in the audience who've been to Gainsight's Pulse event, it feels like a movement. It feels like a revivalist meeting, customer success. And everyone knows that Gainsight is putting it on, but it feels so much bigger than Gainsight. And the same way with Salesforce and their event, Dreamforce, it feels so much bigger and larger than the one vendor. And so the ecosystem piece of it is absolutely critical. And the part that I think most companies get wrong is the competition. They define their category in such a way to exclude the competition because they want to go to the analysts and say, these guys can't do what we do. We're the only ones over here. And actually, you want to say, no, this is a movement. It includes all these companies. Now, within this movement, here's why we're the best. But this movement has got to be all-encompassing. So I think in conclusion, no matter how early stage you are, this is something you've got to think about. I think it's got to be core to the mission of what you're trying to build. It's got to be core to the value proposition you're articulating. It's got to be big enough that can accommodate your growth and where you want to be. And it's got to be coupled with something real and tangible and functional that the customer can buy today. And if you pull off those things and you build a category, that's when you're off to the races, because that's when you move from selling to the customers buying and saying they have to have you. So let me stop there. I guess we have 2 more minutes. Any questions? Well, I think one thing both companies have done well is get complementary vendors to be part of it. If you go to Dreamforce, there's obviously a whole hall where lots of ecosystem partners are part of it. If you go to the Gainsight Pulse event, there's an entire hall where lots of people are there that are adjacent vendors. And so this is where, again, you have to be willing to, even folks that may be overlapping with your solution or may have functionality that you sort of do, you want the more the merrier. Then it feels like a movement. They're bringing their customers, they're bringing their stakeholders to the table. And it can be hard. The startup I was with, we had an attitude of, this is ours, we don't want anyone else around us. And it's much harder to create a movement that way. I think there are things that require capital. Certainly, these, events and event marketing require a lot of capital. But, Tom Siebel did something interesting early days that required no capital. He went to, at the time, Accenture was called Andersen Consulting. He went to the head of Andersen Consulting and said, CRM is the future. He convinced the CEO that this was where the world was going. And he said, I'm going to let you, Andersen Consulting, invest $10 million in the company. And in return, I want 100 of your consultants sitting in my office where I can train them. And all of a sudden now, and Siebel must have been a 30 or 40 person company at this point. They had 100 Andersen consultants trained and ready to evangelize and out in the market. And so I think customers and partners can be a low-cost way for you to get the message out. It's amazing to me how much most startups in our portfolio under-leverage their existing customers and their testimonials and having them evangelize. And it's also amazing to me how much the messaging is varied. You go to a startup and you ask 20 employees to say the value proposition, you get 20 answers. You talk to 20 customers and you get 20 answers. If you talk to any customer of Siebel, they said, hey, we bought CRM and here's why. And so getting that consistency, I think, is also important. Oh, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone coming today. Thank you.